As protests rage across Iran, a Kurdish activist tells DW exclusively that the elite Revolutionary Guard has fanned out throughout the country, stopping vehicles, searching mobile phones, stoking more resentment against the regime and its security forces. The Guards are estimated to number between 150,000 and 200,000 active personnel. They have their own army, navy, and air force, a parallel military whose official role is to protect the legacy of the Islamic Revolution of 1979. They're led by Mohammad Pakpour, who reports directly to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, bypassing the government and president. The Guards are largely insulated from the economic pressures felt by Iranians, due to their control over defense, oil and gas, construction and telecommunications concerns worth billions of dollars, while ordinary Iranians suffer under sanctions, fueling more resentment against the Guards and the theocratic regime. The Guards have also dealt with Iran's proxy forces in the Middle East, the so-called Axis of Resistance, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and Houthi rebels in Yemen. Multiple countries have labeled the Revolutionary Guards a terrorist organization. This has made them a prime target in recent years. In 2020, a U.S. airstrike took out the head of the Al-Quds Force, an elite unit within the Guards. And last summer, Israeli airstrikes killed much of the Guard's senior leadership. Despite those losses and significant damage done to its proxies Hamas and Hezbollah, the Revolutionary Guards have maintained their position. Their closeness to the supreme leader makes them indispensable to the regime and makes them a priority target for any international intervention.
Let's take a closer look at how the Iranian regime is holding on to power and bring in Kamran Matin. He's an associate professor of international relations at the University of Sussex in the UK and specializes in Iranian politics. Welcome back to DW. Now, Kamran, the protests seem to have largely dissipated. Dissent has been quashed once again. Is this the end of the challenge to the regime?
By no means. I think the experience of actually the entire life of Islamic Republic has shown that there are periodic popular unrest, and each uprising has been stronger and larger than the previous one. And the underlying reasons for these uprisings have not gone away, and therefore one has to expect that they will recur. That there are problem of crises of political crisis, economic crisis, legitimacy crisis, all of these intersecting and at different times, depending on external and internal circumstances, lead people to get to the streets. So while this particular repression has been extremely violent, and even by the standards of Islamic Republic, which is notorious for its heavy hand against opposition and any dissident, it's quite remarkable. I mean, we are talking about thousands of people. I mean, you mentioned the figure of 2,000, but there are estimates of 12,000 and even 20,000, because if you take just a couple of cities casualties and multiply it by the number of towns and cities the demonstrations took place in, which are around more than 100, then I think the likely figure is much larger. And also because of the internet blackout, we don't know the exact extent of casualties in each individual city at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Some European leaders are going as far as suggesting the regime's days are counted. Are these assessments correct, or would you file them under wishful thinking?
I think Islamic Republic will not voluntarily relinquish power in the way, for example, that the previous regime in Iran, the monarchy of Imam Reza Pahlavi, did in 1979. Islamic Republic will use all its repressive forces and any brutality it can think of to stay in power. And so long as IRGC and law enforcement forces, the Basij militia, are willing and able to repress the population, the protests, I think they will continue. What might undermine this is a disintegration of leadership at the highest level. For example, given the multiple factions within the Islamic Republic, if Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei dies a natural death or is assassinated by United States in an airstrike or something similar, then we could potentially expect an infighting, which in turn would undermine the ability of the regime to react in a coherent way against against the protesters and various sections of society which are waiting, for the opportune moment to rise against the regime.
Yeah, but some experts believe that in such a scenario, the next leader might well come from within the Revolutionary Guard. What would that mean for the people who in recent days and weeks have been out in the streets demanding a change in regime, a move towards democracy and basic human rights, essentially?
I think it's unlikely that we have someone taking the position of leader from within IRGC, because Iranian constitution stipulates that the supreme leader has to be a senior cleric with high credential in theology and recognized by his peer. IRGC might have a preferred candidate, but it cannot field an IRGC officer as leader. However, there are people who talk about a period of military rule, a sort of de facto coup d'etat in which IRGC unilaterally rules the country. But I don't think this can last, because there are multiple factions and many of them have enormous economic power, and they themselves have various IRGC commanders aligned with them. So the infighting, I think, will be probably too much if Khamenei is not there. And the process of selecting of a new leader can have unexpected outcome, and it's not very easy to settle, because the number of claimants are quite high, and none of them necessarily accepts the authority of the other, something which we didn't have, for example, in 88 when Ayatollah Khomeini died, and the current leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, was able to relatively easily ascend to the leadership.
I want to look at the role the Revolutionary Guard is currently playing in Iran, because the regime, as you mentioned, has proven extremely resilient, in big part because they were being propped up by the IRGC. What role have they played? How have they been instrumental in keeping the Islamic leadership in place?
I mean, in some ways, IRGC is the regime, so it's not popping up the government in that sense, because it controls more than 1/3 of Iranian economy, and its former retired commanders actually occupy various civilian positions in highest level. For example, the current Speaker of the Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, used to be an IRGC commander, or Mohsen Rezai, who used to be commander of IRGC, is in the National Security Council, and so on. So IRGC has enormous power. And also it's ideologically motivated, and it has received preferential treatment from the Khamenei himself, in the sense that its members receive a better economic incentives and so on. And they have also experience of Iran-Iraq war, fighting in in Syria alongside Assad forces, successive waves of protests which they have quashed. I mean, they in that sense, they are both brutal and coherent. But the only weakness they have is the leadership, because the supreme leader is a sort of both a spiritual and also a political leader for them, which is why most people expect or hope that he will be, i.e. the supreme leader, the one probably taken out by a U.S. intervention. But we can't be sure about that, because, of course, the United States must have a exit strategy as well as a plan for who comes next. And at this moment, at least, we don't have enough information whether there has been any deals made behind the scenes with some elements within the regime, or the United States has any candidates to support to replace the current leadership in Iran.
Exactly. The Iranian leadership showed defiance, but also signaled some readiness to talk with the United States. We don't know if that is already happening behind the scenes. U.S. President Donald Trump says no. What bargains would the regime be ready to strike in order to stay in power, you think?
I think the talks basically is a tactic by the Iranian regime to buy time. They know that President Trump tends to be quite impulsive and doesn't have the patience to stay on a single issue for too long. So they might signal they are ready to make concessions, but in reality, they want to drag on the negotiations the way they did in relation to the nuclear file. But there are also talks that, United States might have, backroom deals with elements within the regime, not necessarily the official, power holders. If excuse me, if this is the case, then I think they still need to basically get rid of the supreme leader, because while he's around, I don't think other elements within the regime who have enough power and willingness to make concessions to the US, they can't really do that so long as the supreme leader is there and is opposing such moves. Whether Iran will preemptively strike US or Israel, I don't think that is likely. But if United States strikes, then for the regime, I think everything is possible to do. And in fact, they might benefit from a limited short-term conflict, because that allows them to deal with the protesters, the ones they have arrested, and they have promised swift trials and lots of probably executions, something which President Trump has also said if it happens, he will strike. So usually, historically, Iran has benefited from external conflicts in order to justify its internal repression on a massive scale, as we have seen in recent days.
That was Kamran Matin of the University of Sussex. Thank you so much. So it's great to have you on the show.
Well, after making threats to intervene following Iran's brutal crackdown on nationwide protests, US President Donald Trump has signalled that the situation in the country may be calming down. Observers say at least 2,500 people have been killed so far in the violence, with Amnesty International claiming Iranian authorities have committed mass killings on an unprecedented scale. Here's some of what Trump had to say when speaking earlier at the White House.
We've been told that the killing in Iran is stopping, and it's stopped, and it's stopping. And there's no plan for executions or executions. So I've been told that on good authority. We'll find out about it. I'm sure if it happens, we'll all be very upset.
Meantime, the US is reportedly evacuating non-essential staff from its Middle East military bases, including the Udeid US military base in Qatar. In a press statement, the Qatari government said the move was in response to current regional tensions. It comes after Iran threatened to strike US military bases in the Middle East if Washington intervenes on behalf of protesters. So will Donald Trump intervene or in Iran? We can talk through this with Behnam Taleblu. He's Senior Director of the Iran Program at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Welcome to you. Now, Donald Trump says he's been told that the killing of Iranian protesters has stopped, but at the same time, several countries are telling their citizens to leave Iran, and we've also just heard Britain has also temporarily closed its embassy. What do you make of all this?
Well, pleasure to be with you. I certainly think that the reports of the stay of execution of one person that the Islamic Republic had arrested during these protests may be behind President Trump's more optimistic statement. But that does not at all, in my view, convey the facts on the ground. The regime has brutalized its own people. Reports of anywhere from 12,000 to 20,000 killed under the cover of now nearly a week-long internet blackout that is designed precisely to prevent people like President Trump, major Western policymakers and decision makers, from seeing the brutal crackdown from the state against the street. So make no mistake, this is week 3 of Iran protests, certainly different volume in this week than in the past 2 weeks. But I think everything still very much is on the line, not just the lives of the Iranian people, but the credibility of the United States and the resolve of the American president.
We know that Tehran has seemingly crossed what Donald Trump indicated was a red line of his, and that's violence against protesters. We're seeing many thousands of people, according to activists, killed in Iran. What do you think the US is going to do next? Do you think it will intervene militarily, or is diplomacy still an option?
Well, even as we speak, I think we're seeing a kind of through line in President Trump's strategy, not just towards Iran, not just towards adversaries, but towards allies, which is the strategic cultivation of uncertainty. Sometimes this is used as a head fake to get the adversary to overlean in a certain direction, potentially like we saw with Iran and Israel during the 12-day war. Other times it may be designed to induce a false sense of security, or other times simply to confuse the adversary. But I think President Trump has a pretty strong track record on Iran just within the past year, using military force to take out their nuclear program, and more recently targeting the leadership of its sole state partner in South America. So the regime, nonetheless, is likely preparing for all options on the table. President Trump more recently said that he would not be negotiating with the Islamic Republic while the killing was going on. If I had to bet, Tehran is keen to tempt Trump towards negotiations now that there is a stay of execution. But that stay of execution, again, is only for one prisoner and only brief.
You're saying the Iranian regime is preparing for all options. If the US does, in fact, end up taking military action, how do you think the Iranian government is going to respond to that?
Well, I'm much more interested in how the Iranian street is going to be responding to that. The Iranian government is going to be responding, however, to be brief, in several ways based on if it's a symbolic strike or meaningful strike, or if it's a strike against the regime's strategic assets, meaning what's left of the nuclear program or what's left of the missile program. If it's a symbolic strike, potentially some far-flung base that's likely empty, then the regime may likely take it on the chin or may engage in some symbolic, escalation and try to achieve parity. But if it is meaningful, as in if it levels the playing field between the state and the street, the regime really will be in a bind. And that's why I think President Trump has to think about this not as an operation, but as a campaign, thinking about all tools of national power, economic, cyber, intelligence, and yes, even military. I mean, it's Iranians that are dying in the darkness here